Go ahead, Kristen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Taylor. I'm quickly trying to close my Outlook, so if you hear a little buzzing, I'm sorry. I had some emails open and now I'm like, no, I can't have it pinging. So give me 1 second while I share my screen.
Oh, we do
Okay.
have a question in the chat. I'm sorry, Kristen. I'm going to
Yeah,
jump in. So Megan will be sending information as to how to receive a certificate. Essentially, you'll be connecting with Eileen Acosta, but all of that will be in the follow-up email. Great question.
real quickly, Jen, did that go to you directly? Because I do not see it, and I wonder if maybe I don't have access to the chat.
It 100% did, and I
Oh,
didn't
good.
see it.
Okay.
So,
No, that's okay. I just didn't want questions to be coming in for me and me not seeing them. So perfect. Okay. Thank you all for joining today. As Jen and Taylor mentioned, my name is Kristin Preyss. I am your account manager here at OverDrive. Today we are talking about basically an OverDrive basics. So really kind of going over all you'll need to know from Marketplace to help with the selection committee. I did want to introduce, and they are on the call muted. I partner with two other teammates here at OverDrive to serve RCLS. Claire is your digital content librarian. So she's kind of, oh, she's going to show her little face. Hey, Claire. So she is your go-to if you have any questions about the content itself. She is the curation expert, anything you need there. And then we also partner with Allison, who's your product support specialist, cue Allison waving. And she is more of your technical contact. So if you have questions about marked records, Allison's definitely your go-to. Any bugs or other things you encounter, I do want to note that if it's a patron specific issue, that will have to be for technical support. But if you're discovering anything from the admin staff side of things, please let us know and we'll get you squared away. Allison can also be the liaison between technical support and integration support. So if you're having any trouble authenticating or things like that, and I can kind of be your liaison for the accounting and invoicing team. So you do have direct access to contact all of these teams under the support tab in Marketplace. As well, you will see Claire and Allison's and my email and direct extensions and all that good stuff. So that's under the support tab in Marketplace. For the agenda, so a lot of things to cover. I'm going to go as quickly as possible. A couple things I want to note. I will send a follow-up of this deck to Taylor for her to distribute to all the attendees and those that weren't able to attend today. There will be a couple of things that'll be more detailed in the follow-up materials, and that's just for the sake of time. So today we're going to be going over kind of Advantage Consortium, the difference. A lot of you probably have two logins now, one for the pool and maybe one for Advantage. So we're going to talk about the difference between some of those. We're going to review lending models and the options available to you as a selector. Review some of the title details and how to read Marketplace, how to determine if there are holds, what you already own, what's available from the pool or other Advantage accounts, and searching. And searching is one of the areas we're going to give you some tips. But in the follow-up materials, there will be 10 tips to kind of maximize searching. So things like pinning searches to your accounts and other ways that you can streamline that. So definitely look for the follow-up PDF for some even more information. We're going to go over some purchasing tools that can kind of streamline some of the carts that you're creating. And we're also going to review holds and patron interests, or you may know them as notify me tag titles, those kind of recommendations. And we'll review where you can find this information, how you can help it create some carts for you and kind of see what's in demand amongst our CLS patrons. And then if we have time, we're going to round out with some weeding capability. That one is a little bit more geared towards your Advantage account, but a lot of the specifics are the same, why we want to consider weeding titles, things like that. But that'll be time dependent. Otherwise, you'll have them in the follow-up materials. So just some brief knowledge. We always like to confirm kind of the difference between the pool collection and your Advantage accounts. So the shared collection, the consortium, RCLS, ePool, whatever you want to call it, that is equal access to everyone in RCLS. Titles are purchased first come, first serve, not prioritized to certain patrons over others. And then you have your Advantage account likely. So this is that sub account that's specifically for your patrons. Content is made available to everyone in RCLS, but their holds are going to be prioritized to your home users. So that's kind of what Advantage is. It also has the capability to curate collections specifically for your patrons and so on. Now, how do we identify what account you're in? So the biggest thing is that you likely have two usernames now, one for the pool and one for your Advantage account. We kind of distinguish the difference between which your account you're using based on the username. So your pool account will likely be ramapocatskill.lib. Your first initial last name. In the upper right corner, it'll just say your name and Ramapo Catskill Library System. The difference with your Advantage account is it actually says .adv in the URL. So that's the big difference there. It also in the upper right-hand corner will note your specific member library name in addition to RCLS. So those are kind of some safeguards you can review to make sure that you're signed into your right account. So you know if you're in the pool account or you're in your Advantage account, because the Marketplace homepage looks exactly the same for Advantage users and pool selectors. Oh, perfect. Just Advantage accounts, even better. Okay, so no pool accounts. So, but still, that's how you can find out which Advantage account you're in. It says your library name up next to your name and RCLS in the upper right corner. It also says ADV in the username. A little bit about Advantage Plus. So we often get the questions, what's the difference between Advantage and Advantage Plus? So Advantage is actually your sub account, that account where you're purchasing those titles specifically for your users. Advantage Plus is the sharing feature. So that's what enables your Advantage titles to be shared with the rest of RCLS when they're not in use amongst your members. So RCLS enabled this at the consortium level. The idea behind it is really to improve title selection, availability, and circulation for all members of the consortium. The great news is your users always skip to the top of the queue on those copies. So there's that built-in incentive for your local home users and nothing additional you have to do as a member or manage. All Advantage titles are shared automatically with the rest of the consortium on the 4th of the month. So they are restricted to your home users, potentially for the first few days, depending on, when you're purchasing or things like that. For Advantage accounts, monthly or bi-monthly is probably plenty. But if you purchase more often, just wanted to make you aware that titles are made available as of today on the 4th of the month for RCLS. And I thought it would be a little helpful to kind of show you the difference. So how do these Advantage accounts really impact those patron holds? Well, essentially on the back end, Advantage users are put on two separate wait lists. One for the shared collection copy, if there's one. Again, equal access to everyone, first come, first serve. And then one for your Advantage copy, which they're likely getting a priority on. They're only waiting against other members of your home library. Users are going to receive whichever copy comes available first. Chances are it's going to be the Advantage copy, but if it's the consortium copy, they, of course, have access to that. And then once the user receives a copy of the title, they're essentially removed from both waiting lists. So patrons do not know this. Patrons do not see separate wait lists. You as selectors do not see separate wait lists. It's just kind of the functionality on the back end. I wanted to give you an idea of how they have access to both collections and which titles come available first. So some follow-up materials, again, in the deck that I will send afterwards. These will be live links that you can click on and follow, but redirecting to some help articles and videos. We actually have an entire e-learning module that our training team put together specifically for Advantage best practices. So we'll cover some of the things today, but I definitely recommend following up with that. There's also just kind of a best practices one-sheeter of, hey, these are the great things you should try to do to stay on top of your Advantage account. And then, of course, you can contact Claire, Allison, and myself under the support tab in Marketplace. So understanding lending models, because there's a lot of them these days. So we technically have 4 lending models that publishers require their content circulate in. I will note, publishers determine title prices and the lending models that they offer. OverDrive had our choice. Every publisher would offer every lending model, and then the library can choose what works best for them. The good news is these days, a lot of publishers do offer multiple lending models, so you can choose what works best. The first lending model is called One Copy, One User, or OCOU, as you'll sometimes see it in Marketplace. And this works just like a physical item in your collection. You're purchasing an individual copy. One patron can borrow an individual copy at a time, and it never expires from your collection. You have it forever. Then you have metered access, which has kind of 4 different subcategories. Now, these work similar to you're buying one copy and one patron can borrow that one copy at a time. However, they're metered to expire out of your collection after a determined period. Now, it may be a determined period of time, so we call this metered access by time. And typically that'll be for 12 or 24 months. After that 1 or 2 years, the titles will expire. And if you choose, you could repurchase that for your collection. Another one is metered access by checkout. Now, this is pretty favorable among libraries. What you can do here is the title will not expire until it has a certain amount of checkouts on it. So for example, HarperCollins offers this lending model. Their content is metered access for 26 checkouts. They're almost buying like 26 licenses. That title's not going anywhere until you circulate it 26 times. So that could take 6 months or that could take 5 years. Libraries tend to like this one just because they're guaranteeing their return on their investment. It's not going anywhere. We also have a newer one, metered access by checkout concurrent users. Sometimes you'll hear us refer to that as OverDrive Max or MACU, MACU, metered access concurrent users. Similarly, you're buying a certain amount of licenses, but they can be checked out by multiple users at a time. So for example, you may buy 100 licenses of a title. Those can be 50 checkouts today, 25 6 months ago, or 6 months from now, and 25 3 years from now. So title's not going anywhere until all those checkouts occur, but they can circulate by multiple patrons at a time. Really great for book clubs or community reads or for those high demand titles when available. And then we have very few publishers that offer metered access by time or checkout, basically the earlier of the two. I think like W.W. Norton is one of the only publishers still offering that lending model, not as popular and not as ideal. We then have a simultaneous use lending model. This is how RCLS's magazines function. You're typically buying a bundle of titles for an annual subscription, and then you have unlimited access to those. Not heavily used at the Advantage level, but it is an option available to you. And then the last one, which is becoming more and more favorable, is our cost per circ. Some refer to it as CPC or pay per use. If you're familiar with things like Hoopla, it functions like that, where you can add titles under this lending model, but only pay a fee if it gets checked out. You can also set a monthly budget, so you know I'm only willing to spend X amount on cost per circ. These last 2 lending models, simultaneous use and cost per circ, are not eligible to be shared through Advantage Plus. So if you utilize those lending models, they will be restricted to just your home users. That way you're not kind of footing the bill for the whole consortium. So a little bit about some of these lending models in a bit more depth. So one copy, one user, again, you're really budgeting for those individual titles or copies, much like physical items in your collection. These are perpetual use. They never expire. You kind of have it forever. It's good for those big titles that you know are either classics and going to be around for a while, or if you have an intent on keeping it in your collection. Some libraries like purchasing, one copy in this option if available, and then maybe offset some of the holds with a cost per circ or something like that. Metered access, again, you're still budgeting for individual titles, but they do expire from your collection after a set period of time. Some publishers only offer metered access, unfortunately. So while I had mentioned some publishers kind of give you the choice, others do not. So sometimes it's your only option, but it is really nice because titles almost weed themselves. So maybe in the first year or something like that, you may need 2 copies of a really bestseller, holds are fulfilling quickly, so on. But then moving forward, maybe you only need 1 copy or not at all because the pool has a copy or something like that. So metered access does tend to manage itself a little bit over time. So maybe plan to offer multiple copies in the shorter term and maybe 1 or even none moving forward. So our main marketplace homepage is really where you're going to find all of those 1 copy, 1 user and metered access titles. We're going to look at kind of the homepage there and look at some search techniques and other tools you can put in place. But that's really on the homepage what you're going to see. A couple ways you can search this is just, I'll go back up for the screenshots, either a quick or advanced search. So similar to a Google search bar, right at the top, you can type in a title or the author name, a keyword, so on. Advanced search, a little bit more in depth if you want to see, fiction ebooks that came out in the last 2 months or something like that. You could put a little bit more parameters on those. On the left-hand side of the homepage, we feature a bunch of must-have lists. So these are going to be our current sales that we're running or other top reoccurring lists such as New York Times bestsellers lists of the week and so on. And then also under a tab at the top, we have under the featured tab at the top, we have a more handpicked list that Claire and her team have put together. A lot of trending topics, also great finds in those sales and other things. So you can find all of these from the homepage. And then you can also within searches filter for certain lending models. So if you want to try to avoid the metered access, or if you have to do it, you're willing to do metered access by checkout or things like that, you can actually filter for individual lending models from your search results. Cost per circ. So again, this is a newer lending model to us. We've probably had it for a few years now. You can cherry pick titles in your collection. So we do know some libraries that offer hundreds of thousands of titles in this lending model, but for the most part, libraries pick maybe 1 or a handful to do at a time to really help offset some of those holds. It's also a really great tool to test out a new title, genre, language before permanently investing in some of those titles. So while it can help with holds, it's also a way to kind of gauge interest before buying a more permanent copy of a title. As I had mentioned, it's kind of a cost-effective way to hit that sweet spot with holds. And then it's also really great for audiobooks, which tends to be a little bit more expensive. If you have only 1 or 2 patrons waiting on holds, chances are you can fulfill their needs through this lending model for a lot more cost-effective than purchasing maybe a permanent copy of an audiobook. And then you do set a monthly budget for CPC titles. So right now it's by format. So you can set a budget for all the CPC ebooks that you have or all of the CPC audiobooks that you have. I think that's why some libraries only add so many at a time so they can budget it a little bit more. On the roadmap for the future, we are going to move towards title level budgets for CPC, but that's to come. So a little bit about shopping for CPC. Right now it is kept a little bit separately. On the left-hand side, we have a shop tab, and there's actually a drop down to cost per circ. So you do kind of have to go to a different landing page to discover what titles are available in CPC. Should have mentioned that earlier. Not every publisher offers this lending model, unfortunately. However, more and more are open to this option and are willing to add, all of their catalog, part of their catalog available in this lending model. So while you might not be able to fill all of your holds through this option, there will be a lot of titles available. Like I said, we have hundreds of thousands of titles available, and publishers like Penguin Random House, Books on Tape, they are offering their full catalog in here. So those are going to be a lot of titles that you have on hold. But you do have to drop down to a separate location. Again, another thing on the roadmap is that we're combining them into one view. More to come on that. From the CPC page, we do have a bunch of curated collections on the homepage that you can browse for, such as ebook and audiobook sellers, best book club picks, cheapest cost per circ titles, things like that. And then you can also use things like the search bar, advanced search, so on. And then if you're interested in adding a CPC title, rather than adding a title to a cart and checking out, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you just select add CPC title. And when you don't want to offer it anymore, you revoke the CPC title. So it really is kind of on-demand, custom. Some libraries just turn on a title for CPC for maybe like a week to fulfill some of their holds, and then they turn it off. So that's an option. The nice thing too with cost per circ is you can schedule a removal date. So you don't have to remember to go back in and remove these titles. You can just select, hey, before the end of the month, turn these off in CPC. I'll start the next month fresh. Okay.
So not Thursday, but okay.
Oh, Judy, okay. I think you're off mute.
Thursday, yeah, okay. So it's the 2nd and the 5th?
Oh, that's okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so simultaneous use, as I mentioned, this is mostly used at the consortium level. You can subscribe to a bundle of titles for typically an annual subscription. Some publishers might offer a 30-day option or a single title option, but these titles are available for multiple patrons at once. Really great for large-scale book clubs or community-wide reads, things like that. There are a lot of audiobooks available in this. So Tantor and Blackstone offer simultaneous use packages, which could be a really great offer. Again, at the advantage level, maybe not super telling unless you're doing some type of program like that, but these options are available to you, so I wanted to share them. And as I mentioned earlier, our CLS magazines work this way. We also have a comic subscription that might be of interest to Advantage accounts. And similar to cost per circ, simultaneous use is kind of on a separate drop down under that shop tab. It's just the cost per circ and simultaneous use lending models that are a little bit separate, but just kind of a heads up there. I won't go through all this. Okay, so understanding title details. So how do I know what I own, what I don't own, what's in the shared collection, what's in my Advantage collection, and so on? Okay, so when you're in Marketplace, whether you search for a title, click on one of those links, this is an example of what a search results will show you under an individual title. So we have all of the good details of the title itself. Next to the cover art, you'll see the title and author, number of Notify Me tags, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The lending model will be in a blue box. So in this audiobook example, it's only that non-expiring one copy, one user that this title is available in. There are multiple options. They would kind of be listed out there next to those blue boxes. Under the cover art, you'll see the formats that are available in. You can see any reviews around the title or even sample the title. Sometimes that's helpful with audiobooks if, that narrator or things like that. So you can sample those. On the right-hand side, you will see the price of purchasing one copy of that under that lending model that's in the blue box. Above it, you'll see if it's currently pending in another cart. So this would represent if it's pending in another one of your Advantage accounts. If it was a pool side of things, that would be for any of the consortium level carts. You can share the link in Libby if you want to share it with a staff member or a friend. You have the ability to add it to a new cart or an existing shopping cart. So shopping in Marketplace is really like any online shopping experience. You find something you want to buy, you add it to a cart, you check out. The nice thing about Marketplace is you can have up to 5 carts going at one time. So we know that selectors sometimes have different budgets for ebook or audiobook or adult, young adult, juvenile. So this way, while you're reviewing a list, you could actually add titles to individual carts or into separate carts if it helps you track budget or things like that. You can always combine them or keep them separate, but you can have multiple going at a time, which is kind of a nice feature if you need it. And then under the title is all of that good metadata information we get from the publisher. So the language, street date represents the publication date or when it was available for circulation. You have the publisher, ISBN, if it's part of a series, the audience, subject, BISAC, all that good stuff. Now, as a member of a consortium, if you own a title, we provide you even more information. So I am actually going to go to this next one to kind of show you the difference between Advantage and Consortium. So in the box, I'm pointing to the page like you can see it, I'm sorry. In the box under the metadata for the title, you'll see kind of an ownership grid. The top line that next to Consortium is going to represent the shared collection or RCLS. The bottom line is going to represent Advantage. And as long as you're signed in with your Advantage URL, as discussed earlier on, it's automatically going to represent just your Advantage account and any of your patrons' kind of information, their holds, things like that. And we're identifying that just from that login that you're using. So in this case, the first few columns represent any copies owned. So we have that one copy, one user. In this case, there are no consortium copies, no Advantage copies. And that's because this title isn't offered in one copy, one user. From metered access or MA, in this case, this is saying that there are 2 copies in the pool collection and 1 copy in my Advantage account. CPC and SU or simultaneous use, we just identify those as yes or no. Do I have this in CPC? Yes or no. And then we have Advantage Plus. Now this represents that sharing. The top line is going to show how many Advantage copies are shared across the whole consortium. So what are shared from other members of RCLS? Where your Advantage line is how many copies you may have shared. So in this case, I only own 1 metered access copy and I'm sharing that 1 metered access copy. As for the pool, there are 2 metered access copies that they own, but there's another 15 copies shared from other Advantage users that my patrons have access to. However, we keep these a little separate because they are going to be prioritized to their own home users. So likely you're not going to get those as quickly as maybe your own Advantage copy or those pool copies, those 2. Then we have a section on holds. So you can see active holds versus suspended holds. So we're not going to get into it too much today, but when a hold becomes available to a patron, they have 3 options. They can borrow the title, they can cancel the title, or they can suspend it, what we call deliver later. And that keeps their place on the wait list, but it says, I'm not ready to read it now. Go to the next person and come back to me in, and you can customize that period, whether it's 7 days, 14 days, so on. So we do like to track those kind of separately because it lets you know this patron really isn't actively waiting for the title. They do have a hold on it, but they're not actively waiting. So we do kind of separate out that data point. So in this example, it says that there's 14 holds across the whole consortium, none of which are my own patrons because I have 0 on the Advantage line, okay? And then there's another 17 that are suspended. And then checkout data. So out reflects copies that are currently checked out to a patron. The patron does have to formally select borrow. So if they're in their 3-day pickup window, they got their holds notification, they haven't selected if they want to borrow or deliver later or cancel their hold, we don't reflect it as out until they actually have taken it out. So sometimes there's a little limbo. In this example, it looks like only one of my 2 copies are out, but they're still holds. Well, we had contacted someone, but they just haven't picked borrow yet. The last date that these copies were checked out, how many checkouts occurred in the past 12 months, and how many checkouts of total times. So we include some of those specifics, some of those statistics and other information to help you make purchasing decisions right under the title itself, not having to go into reports or anything like that. Okay, moving on, and feel free to put in any chats or questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep powering through. So a little bit about searching. Again, I had mentioned there's going to be even more kind of tips and tricks in the follow-up materials, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep this section a little high level. So this is your marketplace homepage, and there's a few different ways you can find titles. So I had mentioned previously the quick and advanced search options, just like a Google search bar, where you can search for, keywords, a specific title or author, so on. Advanced search if you want to get a little bit more granular with some of those settings. This is that featured tab where we have those recommended lists from our staff librarians. And on the left-hand side, we have a bunch of tools. So from the shop tab, you can sort to those different lending models, so those CPC or simultaneous use. We feature all of our current sales, and we do have sales going on any given time. A lot of times this month, we have New Year, New You, a lot of, health conscious, workout, everything else that everyone's trying to do in January. We'll have a big romance sale next month. Usually I want to say we do mystery in March, I want to say. But a big one to look out for in June will be our audiobook month. We do a back to school month that features a lot of JYA, college test prep, all that good stuff in the fall. But either way, we have multiple sales going on at any given time. Get more bang for your buck. Look on the left-hand side of your homepage. And then we also have a bunch of reoccurring lists, like I said, those New York Times bestsellers and other things that staff are looking for. We have a section called Discover, where you can actually find titles not yet in your collection, but maybe, the top 200 titles you don't own or things like that. So other kind of time-saving tips to find new stuff. And then you could also save searches. So in the follow-up material, that's going to be one of your little tips and tricks. If you feel like you're going to be looking for the same type things on a regular basis, whether it's adult fiction ebooks that came out in the last month, maybe that's a standard list that you're going to want to review. We recommend saving that as a search so you don't have to put in those parameters every single time. So more details on how you can do that will be in the follow-up materials. This is just zooming in on some of those graphics to kind of show you the lending models that you can filter down for. The quick search, we will try to start auto-populating a result based on what you're typing. But you can kind of click on those or just hit the hourglass to find those titles. Also from the advanced search, you can find some of your pinned searches and must-have lists. Otherwise, you can actually click on the words and make search to put in those parameters. This is kind of what it looks like. Really great if you have, a list of ISBNs or title IDs. You can paste, over 75 of those at a time. Otherwise, you could just look for general subjects, audience, certain publishers or lending models, and a lot more. Okay, so I want to get into some of the purchasing tools we have available. So likely as Advantage selectors, you may be the only one looking at this, and you might not have a lot of time to look at this. So We want to streamline kind of purchasing titles for your Advantage accounts as much as we can. And we have a handful of tools to do that for you. And it's really to address those patron-driven kind of requests that come in. So again, data-driven tools in Marketplace. So we have a few. One is called our Holds Manager, and it's based on holds that your patrons place. One is Metered Access Manager. So as you start purchasing things, we'll help you remind you if titles are coming up on expiration, you know, if they're worthy of a repurchase, if they've already expired, things like that. Patron Interest Manager, which are our Notify Me tags. So titles that you don't yet own yet, but your patrons would like to see you add to the collection. And then we also have Smart Lists. So Smart Lists aren't used as much as the other three, just because we have those things like the must-haves and other tools right on the homepage. But these are available really to find new content. So if you're looking for the latest titles, certain publishers, certain reviews, things like that. But again, we feature a lot of those just right on the homepage. So a holds manager, it's a great way to respond to demand for titles, and it will automatically build a cart and can even automate an order for you, although most libraries don't do that. And if you do, please put in a price budget so there are no surprises. The great thing about these holds managers is you can set up multiple ones. So a lot of times libraries may want to, in their mind, audiobooks are more expensive. So maybe they have to have more holds on an audiobook before they consider purchasing a copy than they do an ebook. Sometimes libraries have separate plans for juvenile, young adult, and adult. If a child is placing a hold and wants to read, we automatically want to buy anything that they want. They tend to be cheaper. So maybe we only need 1 or 2 holds on a juvenile or even a young adult title. And maybe on adult, we need, you know, more like 7 to 10 holds before we consider buying it or something like that. For your Advantage account, you can likely be a little bit smaller. You know, 5's a great threshold, but does that make sense for your budget and your demand? You know your users, and if they are really heavy digital readers and there's a lot more demand on them, maybe you need more like 10 of your patrons waiting before you consider purchasing it. But you can have multiple plans set up, customized for different areas. The follow-up materials will have links and how-to videos of how you can set these up. But it's really just kind of a custom plan. So things like, do you want us to remind you when at least 5 of your patrons are waiting? For your Advantage account, we do recommend running this by holds instead of holds ratio, just because it gives a more accurate picture for Advantage holds. But you can say, you know, I only am interested in certain lending models or audiences. I'll only fill it if it's under $50 or something like that. So just a way to automate so you don't have to dig through the current holds report. Metered Access Manager. So this is a great way to track both going to expire and already expired titles to see if they're worth the reinvestment. Now, this is our newest tool. It just rolled out in November. So we're really kind of streamlining it. Again, you could set up unlimited amount of plans, maybe a separate one for ebook and audiobook. The one thing that we recommend, especially for this metering access, most libraries do not repurchase the title unless they have a patron on hold for it. Or if they know, hey, Netflix is going to come out, this title is going to get popular again. And, you know, it's worth keeping in our collection, or maybe if it's a classic or things like that, that's worth keeping in your collection. But otherwise, I say, unless you have one of your patrons waiting on the title, it probably won't need to be repurchased. You can always repurchase it down the line if, you know, demand ticks up again or anything like that. But this just helps you kind of track all of that. Again, can be customized by format, by audience. You can say, I'm only interested in those metered access by checkout. You can kind of customize and say, tell me when there's 7 days left or things like that, we do automatically remind you when there's 30 days left on a time metered title or 5 checkouts left on a metered by checkout title. Now you can customize that. So some libraries say 5's a lot, remind me when there's only 2 left, or remind me after it already expired if I have a hold. So a lot of customization here. Again, the follow-up materials will walk you through it. If you have any questions setting it up, I'm happy to schedule some one-on-one time too to kind of walk you through it. And our last one, I think I touched base on the smart list too, but patron interest manager. So these are responding to demand based on those titles that user have tagged that they want to be notified on. And if you haven't used kind of Libby as a user yet, so this is where they go to search for a specific title. They're not finding what they're looking for. None of their libraries own it. Rather than getting an option to borrow or place a hold, they have an option to notify me if the library ever acquires the title. If you decide to purchase one of these titles, we will notify everyone that kind of tagged it right away. And they have the option to, they're the first one that reads their notification, they can borrow the title. Otherwise, they can select, I want to place it on hold, I'm ready to read it now, things like that. So these are, again, those titles you don't own yet, and your patrons are recommending that you add them to the collection. Some of these do, I feel like, need a little bit more vetting. You'll know, hey, this is only going to be popular with that one patron, or, this is worth, an addition to our collection. Great way to kind of gauge, hey, I didn't know we had Russian speakers in our community or things like that. But through this kind of patron interest manager plan, you can customize. You can say, we're only interested in really these languages or this subject or things like that. So you can vet it a little bit more, just because sometimes people request some really niche things. And if you don't think you're going to get the return on it, make sure it's worth your library's budget and investment. So this tool really helps you kind of streamline that. You can say, only remind me if at least 2 of my patrons have requested this title or things like that. A really nice thing about all of these purchasing tools, when set up in your Advantage account, they are custom to your Advantage account, meaning it's only going to result in what your home users have on hold if you do the holds manager. For this one, it's only going to pull in what your patrons have tagged to notify me. And then the metered access manager is only going to look at titles that are expiring from your Advantage account, so things you personally purchased. So if you're new selectors or just kind of picking back up with your Advantage account, there might not be a ton of titles in there now, but something to help kind of streamline that process. And then a smart list, as I mentioned, really general, and you can build cards based on anything that you'd like to add to the collection. Again, I recommend just using the must-haves, but if you'd like to see it in kind of cart form, that's an option. Okay. So purchasing for holds, I want to get into some of these areas and suggestions. So a couple ways that you can manage holds in Marketplace. The first being the current holds report. So all of our reports live under the Insights tab. Now, I'm not getting too deeply in reports today, but I'm happy to go over anything or any questions that you may have. Again, my contact information is under the support tab. But current holds, just as it sounds, everything currently on hold across the system. You can there's a button that says run new report where you can kind of customize. So if you want to limit and just see what your patrons have on hold, you can select your library, and then it'll be a shorter list and it'll only show your patrons' holds. Now, if you want to see where your patrons sit compared to the whole RCLS queue, you can leave it for all branches, and there will be an ADV or Advantage holds column compared to an all holds column. And all holds will represent the whole RCLS consortium, and Advantage holds will just be your home users, just your Advantage patrons. So that's kind of nice if you're kind of thinking between one title and another. Both have 5 holds, but there's another 200 in RCLS, so it might be more benefit to me to help the whole group and purchase something that's in larger demand across the consortium. So can certainly look at the current holds report. You can set up searches for holds. So we have filters for simply show me a list of titles with 3 or more holds, if you prefer looking at titles and kind of that search results rather than just a list of the title itself. We have the holds manager, which I just talked about. Again, this will generate and create a cart for you, and we'll also send you an email when the cart's ready. So it's basically just looking at the current holds report on your behalf and kind of streamlining it for you. You can set it up. I think running it monthly is probably plenty. If you can manage doing it weekly, you know, that's preferred, but for an Advantage account, monthly is probably plenty. And then you can also manage holds under the support tab. If there's anything that you need to remove or anything like that, there is a manage holds button under there. So some questions that you may want to ask yourself when reviewing the holds. So basic of how many holds are there per title? You know, is there enough demand that it's worth my investment? How old are these titles? So how old are these holds, excuse me? And how old are the titles, I guess. From the current holds report, there is a first active holds column. So you can see when were these holds placed? Have they been outstanding for a while? Sometimes it's nice to search that way and address maybe the titles that only have, you know, a couple patrons waiting, but they've been waiting a really long time for a consortium copy or something like that. When was the last checkout of that title? Is it still in demand? Yes, my patron has a hold on it, but are they still actively waiting for it? Is it, you know, a new release? Is it worth the investment in my Advantage account? Again, are the holds current or are they suspended? You know, sometimes we find holds that someone, you know, placed 2 years ago. Realistically, they're not waiting for that title anymore. So it's probably not worth you spending $40 on a copy just for them to cancel their hold. And we have for RCLS every maybe couple of years kind of get rid of some of those really old holds. So everything should be up to date. In the last couple of years, I felt like we did that last year, but just something to think about. Is it worthwhile? Are any of these holds suspended? And then is the title available? Are there any copies or is it expired? Is it even available for purchase? Things like that. So those are nice things that you can consider. They can be seen through, you know, the current holds report, the searching tools, all that good stuff. So you can kind of ask yourself those questions. Want to share some tips and tricks for, I had just said monthly is probably plenty for an Advantage account. For a standard DC, you know, I know the pool selectors, they're probably looking at holds every week. Oh, perfect. And Taylor did mention they try to clear holds that are older than 1 year. So they should all be current holds. That's one less question to ask yourself on a regular basis. So most libraries tend to purchase holds on Fridays. I will say Tuesdays and Fridays are kind of our busiest marketplace days. Tuesdays tends to be when new titles are released and published. And then Fridays, a lot of libraries like purchasing that. So patrons, they're reading over the weekend, they'll happily surprise their holds came in. They're ordering some extra copies for the group. So Tuesdays and Fridays do tend to be the most popular days. But again, it's whenever you have the time. We recommend always, especially in Advantage accounts, choosing the cheaper lending model. You would think that's common or a no-brainer, but sometimes, especially if it's a title that's maybe been out for a couple of years, it's probably not worth licensing it for another 2 years. Maybe you only need it for 12 months. It's often best to purchase that one copy, one user, OCOU kind of non-expiring model. If it's an option, if not, you know, maybe go with the cheapest one. Sometimes it does depend on a case-by-case basis. Is it a new release? Is it Harry Potter, Prince Harry Spare? And you know, everyone's talking about this. It's going to be around for a while. Maybe you wanted to invest in the 2 years right up front, but moving forward, maybe it's not a permanent part of your collection, or maybe you don't need it more than a year. Setting up a holds manager, as I mentioned. It says, don't be afraid to experiment with the ratios. So maybe set up multiple plans. Maybe do one for a 5-to-1 compared to a 10-to-1. And then you can get a feel for, hey, we'd love to be here, but it's expensive to fill all these at a 10-to-1 or a 5-to-1. Maybe a 10-to-1 is more realistic with our budget. So feel free to play around, set up multiple plans. We also recommend that OverDrive Max or MacU lending model. So that's those concurrent users where you're buying a bundle of licenses. We're finding libraries get a lot more return for their budget with those, a lot lower cost per circ. And then they really are great for book clubs, titles with a larger holds list, things like that. As I had mentioned, always shop the sales. Anytime you open a sale list, so again, featured on the left-hand side of the homepage, you can also filter for what's on hold. So on the left-hand side, you can do it 2 ways. You can open your holds list and then filter for what's on sale, or you can open a sales list and filter for what's on hold. So you can see it each way, but obviously more bang for your buck when you're filling holds while they're at a cheaper price. And we have them going on at all time. But June, definitely plan on stocking up on audiobooks, because that's our biggest sale of the year for audiobooks. And then potentially that cost per circ lending model. So again, you're only charged if it gets checked out. Utilizing your Advantage accounts, you're only paying for your own users. People outside of your home library can't see those copies or borrow them. You can set a budget and add several titles, or you can add one title, an ebook, an audiobook, and use that budget just for that single title. So right now the budget is at the format level, but if you only add one title at a time, it'll only go to that title. So you have some customization there, but really great for Advantage accounts. And then I don't think we're going to get into it today, because I want to leave some time if there's any other questions. But we had mentioned making your weeding plan work for you. So there's going to be one more section that'll be on the follow-up materials about weeding and kind of repurchasing expired titles. So is it worth the repurchase? If not, let's make sure we're not promoting a title that has no copies to our patrons. So that's what weeding is. It's suppressing a title from patron view. It's not a permanent decision. You could always unweed a title if you're interested in repurchasing it down the line. We know there are those titles that, resurge and become popular again 2 years later. So you do have those options. And then, I did quickly want to go over those Notify Me and purchasing requests. So Notify Me data, again, this screenshot on the right kind of shows you what it would look like in Libby. They get the little prompt to Notify Me, and then that activity pulls directly over into your marketplace. So you'll see a little tag under the title itself, but you can also run specific searches for Notify Me tag titles, and you can set them up a few different ways. So you'll probably hear these terms used synonymously, where patron interests and Notify Me. So Notify Me is the actual name of the tag itself. We call patron interest kind of all of that patron-driven requests and demand. So you can view them right through the shop tab. So you can set up a search for titles with Notify Me tags. It's a search filter. So any of your lists or things that you open, you can filter by Notify Me tags. Or sort. So list the titles at the top of the page with the most Notify Me tags or something like that. You can automate it by setting up one of those patron interest manager plans, and it can create either a report for you or kind of automate one of those carts. And then we also have a dashboard. So under the Insights tab, there's a whole patron interest section where you can kind of dig in, you can filter by your library, and you can see other data such as how many requests did we have, how many did we purchase, how many are still outstanding, all that good stuff. So I've decided that we're not gonna cover weeding today, but there's gonna be a lot of follow-up materials on this. So a little bit more you can go over. As I mentioned, I'm gonna send this PDF over to Taylor, and whether you wanna post it somewhere or email it out, I'll have you kind of take control of that. But I wanted to ask if there were any specific questions that maybe I didn't cover today or you're interested in talking about. We have a few minutes left where I'm happy to either do a live demo or look at anything that you maybe had a question about. So it was wonderful and you're all experts and I'm so happy. No, I'm teasing.
Thank you, Kristin. Taylor, is there any follow-up on the, like, is there going to be a 102 scheduled?
We do like an advanced training, or we're supposed to do one every year. It'll probably be mid-year though.
Okay, great. So everyone, I'm going to stop the recording.